We're into week 2 of the Instructional Skills Workshop, module 2 of the Instructional Skills Workshop. So we're building on where we started in terms of learning outcomes and in terms of ways to engage students using that community of inquiry model, laying the context for what we do synchronously live with students, and what we might do asynchronously, where students can work and learn on their own time. So with a bit of that context setting, we moved into what are learning outcomes. And this is the kind of format or formula we're using as a prescriptive formula for the purposes of this particular course. And you're going to see where and why and how it's valuable pretty quick here. So we introduced this, we talked about CAB-D, and we'll be writing CAB-D learning outcomes for each of the 3 mini lessons you'll be delivering. I set this up again, I'm reminding us of this because we're going to build on learning outcomes with 2 different ideas today that we're going to stitch together in the context of the lesson design framework we're working in. The first is constructive alignment. So this is an idea from Biggs and Tang in 2011, and it's the idea that these pieces really fit together or support one another. And they talked about enveloping the learner in a supportive learning system. And I love that visual, that picture, that sense of kind of what we want to do and what we want to design and create and facilitate as teachers and instructors. One example of where they saw this used and worked was, or where recent literature has seen this at work. There's an occupational therapy program that was studied recently using this process, and they reported a handful of things that I think point to its success and its value. They talked about increased levels of student success, satisfaction, students feeling these units were well taught, and students feeling the requirements were clear. So I think those are some great aspirational statements and values for us in our teaching. This has been really consistent across the literature. So alignment is a principle we're going to adopt and use throughout this course, and we're going to talk about quite a bit throughout this course. Another kind of perspective on this, it's really useful when we talk about how we design a lesson, is this idea of backward design. Backward in the sense of often we think about content first and we kind of build towards the question of how to assess the content. This really kind of flips that. That's the backward nature, backward design, by starting by identifying the desired results. So this is the question of like, what do students need to be able to do? What do they need to know? What do they need upon graduation or completion of your course or your lesson or your unit, whatever we're talking about? That, as we've identified already, is where your learning outcomes serve a purpose. They clearly articulate for you and your students where we're going, right? What we're going to be able to know, do, or care about at the end of this piece of learning, chunk of learning. Working backward from there, then the second thing to consider in the design process is what the acceptable evidence would be. And this is our assessment. So from the learning outcome to then how would we assess the learning outcome? And based on that, what learning experiences then do we need to plan? What are the teaching and learning activities we need to plan? So you'll see this pretty nicely kind of fits with BOPS, but while BOPS, the BOPPS, is how we would lay out and structure and sequence a lesson for our students, our design is going about it in a different way, right? In our design process, we're starting by clarifying the learning outcome. And you've written such beautiful learning outcomes in that I can see all the detail you're putting into the context. I can see all the detail you're putting into the degree. We're still figuring out how to use those learning verbs really well. But once we clarify that learning outcome, then assessment is kind of almost baked into the learning outcome. If we know the degree to which students will finally demonstrate their learning, then we know what our post-assessment is going to look like. So I would say in terms of determining acceptable evidence, we're probably going to go right from the learning outcome to designing our post-assessment because they're so closely matched. We might start thinking about pre-assessment already, but not necessarily. You might actually go on to planning learning experiences, probably first with a participatory learning. That's the key teaching and learning activity. Then maybe also bridge and summary. Those are kind of the bookends of the lesson, some nice finish and polish. You might even then somewhere in that final stage think about pre-assessment, right? What do I need to check? How can I engage students in what they already know, get them thinking about what they already know to prepare them for the participatory learning and prepare them kind of with confidence to move toward the learning goal, the learning outcome, and that final post-assessment. So I hope this is helpful. I think this is where this kind of gets most concrete for you in our work and in the context of this course. There are other resources we'll kind of point to within the course that we could use, that we provide from the Center for Teaching and Learning around each of these things. And I look forward to seeing what you come up with in the discussion. Cheers.